I sat still in my private West Wing home office of the main estate, both of my hands resting on the solid oak desk, my eyes locked onto the executive power transfer document, spread wide open right in front of me. All I had to do was place my pen on the blank line drawn in red ink at the bottom of legal document, and my son, my flesh and blood Brandon Reed, would take over the absolute throne as the chairman and CEO of the maritime shipping conglomerate, Reed Logistics. I had spent my life battling in the cutthroat business world, from those grueling years driving freight trucks, through brutal economic recessions, to building a shipping empire dominated the east coast of the United States, and I had never once trembled in fear before competitor. Yet, at this historic monumental moment, my right index finger gave a tiny microscopic tremble as it touched the solid gold cap of my fountain pen. Deep down inside my tuned subconscious, forged over 40 grueling years, my razor-sharp survival instinct was sounding a blaring alarm about an immediate, lethal danger, a silent, murderous intent lurking behind the most familiar, loving smiles. Before I tell you how I flipped the chessboard and set a devastating trap to crush those filthy traitors who shared my bloodline, please let me know which city or state you are watching this story from by leaving a comment below. And if you have ever experienced the agonizing, heartbreaking pain of being forced to place your absolute trust in complete, total strangers instead of your flesh and blood child, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now to hear the complete journey of demanding absolute, ultimate justice. My name is Douglas Reed, and at 66 years old I felt exhausted. It wasn't the standard physical fatigue could be cured by a deep night of sleep, but a profound weariness seeped into single inch of my bones. A cold, empty sense of isolation invaded my mind as I began to question the true meaning of the multi-billion-dollar fortune I had sacrificed my life to build and protect. Today was the exact fateful day would decide the absolute destiny of the Reed Logistics empire. The anticipated special board of directors meeting had been scheduled for 10 o'clock this morning on the top floor of our corporate headquarters in the city's financial district. The press releases, the morning financial bulletins, and the corporate communications department were ready, waiting for my signature to broadcast the news. Douglas Reed is retiring and stepping down as chairman, handing over absolute total executive power to his chosen successor, Brandon Reed. I tried to hypnotize myself into believing this was a natural, inevitable generational shift. It was time for the old, tired lion to step back so the young cub could carry the weight of the kingdom. However, my son did not carry himself with the steady, rock-solid composure of a proud heir preparing to ascend to the glorious peak of power. Brandon was pacing back and forth in front of my desk, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against the dark walnut floorboards with an rushed, chaotic rhythm, looking like a terrified condemned prisoner counting his steps toward the hangman's noose. He flicked his wrist to glare at his gold watch, thick beads of cold sweat rolling down his temples. Though I had kept the office air conditioning blasting at a freezing 68 degrees ever since my beloved wife passed away 5 years ago. Dad, please, put the pen to paper and sign the preliminary transfer document. Brandon urged, his voice choked and pitched higher than normal due to extreme, unadulterated tension, his dull gray eyes darting down to the legal document and then flashing back up to my face. We are going to be late for the board meeting. You know how the morning rush hour traffic is on the downtown expressway. Just sign it here, and later when we get to headquarters, we have to do the formal, ceremonial announcement in front of the board to make it binding, and then it's done. He reached out and tapped his finger against the thick stack of files sitting in front of me. His index finger was trembling in short, rapid spasms. Even though he tried to flex his wrist to hide it, microscopic tremor could not escape the razor-sharp eyes of a man who had survived hundreds of life-or-death, cutthroat corporate negotiations like me. I lifted my head, piercing a gaze as sharp as a butcher's knife into the absolute depths of my son's eyes. At 32 years old, in this moment of sheer, absolute panic, Brandon looked no different than the pathetic, terrified 18-year-old boy who had called me, crying from the police precinct at 2 o'clock in the morning, after crashing his expensive luxury sports car into a streetlight because he was blackout drunk. It was the exact same pathetic look, overflowing with intense guilt, fear, and the desperate, pathetic pleading demanding I clean up the toxic mess he had created. The exact second Brandon's frantic pleading voice stopped echoing in the room, the solid walnut double doors of the office were pushed open. Monica, the woman Brandon had married 2 years ago, after a lavish, superficial upper-class charity gala, walked into the room. She was wearing an expensive, form-fitting black silk designer dress, carrying a crafted, pure silver metal tray in both of her hands. Sitting in the center of the silver tray were 2 gold-rimmed porcelain cups, filled with a specialized, dark-roasted herbal coffee infused with fresh ginger. My absolute favorite exclusive morning beverage helped me maintain my sharp focus and warmth single morning. However, instead of her usual arrogant, upper-class party smile, Monica's eyes were darting and avoiding my direct, piercing gaze like a guilty thief. Her hands, featuring painted, bright red manicured nails, were shaking so the bottom of the porcelain cups rattled against the silver tray, creating a sharp, clinking noise, shattered the silence of the room. "I brought you your hot, fragrant ginger herbal coffee, Dad," Monica said in a sweet but broken voice, her breathing rapid and shallow due to anxiety. She lifted the gold-rimmed porcelain cup and placed it next to my right hand, right beside the executive power transfer document, and then placed the other identical cup on the opposite corner of the desk for Brandon. I looked down at the gold-rimmed porcelain cup sitting right in front of me. The bright winter morning sunlight streamed through the glass window, shining onto the surface of the dark brown liquid. My sharp sense of smell, trained from my days working as a gritty dock worker, smelling machine oil and toxic preservatives, detected a catastrophic mixed in with the familiar, comforting, spicy aroma of fresh ginger and premium roasted coffee beans was in faint, bitter chemical scent, smelling like burnt almonds and toxic, lethal aquatic pesticides. Even more obvious, floating on the surface of the coffee, was a thin, shimmering, smoky yellow film, bubbling up tiny, cloudy, unnatural microbubbles, never appeared in natural brewed herbal coffee. And freezing, bone-chilling wave of pure ice shot straight down my spine. They were attempting to murder me with lethal poison right at my desk, inside my damn house. I did not allow a single microscopic muscle in my face to twitch, nor did my eyes change expression. 40 grueling years, surviving the absolute deadliest chess matches in the corporate world, had taught me one ironclad, unbreakable rule. When a perceptive prey discovers a lethal trap, you never panic, scream, or run away to alert the predator. You must remain still to make the hunters believe they are in complete, absolute control of the board. I placed my solid gold fountain pen down onto the oak desk, looking up at my son and his wife with the tired, gentle smile of a weary 66-year-old man. "Monica, thank you so for this wonderful, warm coffee. Smelling this incredible aroma reminds me of those freezing winter mornings 20 years ago, when your mother was still here, caring for my single need. Brandon, before I sign this document and hand over the empire I spent my life building, I need you to walk over to the west wall, open the secure steel safe, and bring me the solid walnut box containing the family's pure gold lion crest wax seal. We must stamp the official seal right next to my signature to guarantee its supreme, unquestionable legality before the board of directors." Brandon blinked, his face lighting up with sheer, unadulterated, ecstatic joy, and he nodded yes. "Dad, absolutely brilliant idea. I will go get it right this second." He whipped around, taking rapid, eager strides toward the wooden wall on the west side of the room where the secure safe was hidden. Monica, driven by predictable psychological instinct, turned her head to watch her husband, anxious and desperate to witness the final ultimate step of their transfer. In those precious tiny 2 seconds, when the vision and absolute attention of both filthy traitors were focused on the wall behind me, I moved with the silent, razor-sharp and perfect precision of an experienced apex predator. The intense physical discipline, from years of driving freight trucks through freezing, icy nights, and my lightning-fast observational skills from the corporate boardroom, had transformed my muscle memory into a sequence of absolute perfection. I reached out with my left hand, lifting my porcelain cup containing the toxic smoky yellow film, gliding it through the air to the opposite corner of the desk, while using my right hand to pull Brandon's clean, fragrant, untainted cup next to my stack of legal documents. The aggressive swap was executed as a silent breath in the dead of winter, without making a single microscopic clink against the solid oak desk, and without spilling one tiny drop of the dark brown liquid over the porcelain rim. By the exact second Brandon turned back around, holding the walnut box containing the gold seal, I was holding the porcelain cup with both hands, taking a slow, deep sip of the fragrant coffee, the hot steam billowing up in front of my face. Seeing me swallow the liquid into my stomach, Monica's eyes lit up as if she had struck a gold mine, a cruel, arrogant smirk flashing across her bright red-painted lips. Monica's body sagged, the tense muscles in her shoulders she had been flexing morning relaxing, looking like someone who had thrown a 100-pound boulder off her chest. She believed the lethal dose of thallium sulfate poison, masked by the strong, spicy scent of fresh ginger, had entered the stomach of her old, dying father-in-law, and in a few short minutes, the multi-billion-dollar fortune and total control of the Reed Logistics empire would fall into their filthy, greedy hands. Take another big sip, Dad. It will help you stay alert and focused, so you can sign everything, Monica urged with a triumphant tone masking her ruthless intent, her eyes blazing with an intense, unquenchable, greedy light she could not hide. The coffee today is rich and unique. I smiled, piercing my calm, freezing, Winter Lake gaze into the face of my precious daughter-in-law, then pushed the gold-rimmed porcelain cup sitting across the desk toward my son. Brandon, you need to pick up your cup and take a big drink. Drink up to celebrate the absolute greatest, most monumental turning point in your career and life. A brand new king preparing to ascend the golden throne must have a sip of morning coffee to celebrate his glorious victory. Brandon was blinded by his greed, his extreme eagerness overriding single ounce of his rational thought. He saw the executive transfer signature seconds away from being finalized, and hearing my flattering, profound congratulatory toast, he didn't hesitate or suspect a single thing. He reached out, grabbed the coffee cup sitting in front of him, brought it to his lips, and took a refreshing gulp straight down his throat. The gulp of coffee carried the entirety of smoky yellow film and the lethal thallium sulfate poison straight down his esophagus, plunging into his anxious, churning stomach. I leaned back into my expensive leather armchair, crossed my arms over my chest, and watched single ticking second pass by, looking like a cold, calculating scientist observing an explosive chemical reaction inside a sealed glass test tube. Exactly 10 seconds after smoky yellow liquid washed down his throat, the devastating, catastrophic effects of the dose of paralyzing neurotoxin began to unleash its power. Brandon's facial complexion changed in a manner. From a flushed, excited pink, his skin turned a sick, leaden gray, and then morphed into a stark white, looking like a piece of soggy paper soaked in freezing rain. The pupils in both of his eyes dilated to the size of coins, his eyes losing focus, rolling around, and as his central nervous system began enduring the lightning-fast, catastrophic attacks of the lethal chemical agent. He dropped the gold-rimmed porcelain cup onto the desk, splashing a dark brown stain across the wood, both of his hands shooting up to clutch his spasming throat. Brandon's breathing hitched, transforming into a desperate wheezing gasp, sounding like a shredded blacksmith's bellows, trying to pump oxygen into a dead, freezing forge. What is wrong with you, Brandon?" Monica shrieked, her arrogant, upper-class face contorting in sheer, unadulterated panic. She lunged forward to grab her husband's trembling arm, her eyes wide with absolute horror as she stared at the rapid, catastrophic physical collapse occurring at a breakneck speed. "My head, I'm so dizzy, the room is spinning. My stomach feels like the absolute fires of hell are roaring and screaming inside me." Brandon choked out a torn, agonizing sob from deep inside his throat, his voice mutating into a raspy, guttural sound. Massive, cold beads of freezing sweat the size of large peas began pouring down his forehead, rolling down his temples, and soaking the collar of his crisp, expensive white dress shirt. The complex muscle system in his legs lost the basic physical ability to support his 210-pound frame. Both of his knees buckled, causing him to stagger his chest, slamming into the edge of the solid oak desk, knocking askew the stack of executive transfer documents he had wanted signed. In the absolute peak moment of facing the excruciating, unimaginable agony caused by the exact lethal poison he had planned to feed his father, Brandon's fundamental, pathetic cowardice exposed itself in the most disgusting, pathetic way possible. He clutched his spasming, agonizing stomach, his dull gray eyes darting around the room in absolute, sheer panic, and then, driven by the desperate survival instinct of a wounded, dying animal, He stumbled backward and sprinted toward the main double doors of the office. He crashed through the walnut doors, sprinting down the marble-tiled hallway of the mansion toward the main central bathroom, where the violent and deafening sounds of agonizing vomiting began to echo, shaking the quiet, peaceful atmosphere of the crisp winter morning. Monica stood paralyzed by the oak desk for 3 long seconds, her arrogant face turning as stark, gray, as if she had watched the gates of hell tear open right in front of her eyes. She was intelligent enough to realize a catastrophic mistake had somehow occurred during the brewing process, or an imperceptible swap of the cups, but her insatiable greed and the absolute terror of being exposed for attempted murder stopped her from telling the truth. She snatched her expensive designer handbag off the leather armchair, spinning around to sprint down the hallway after her dying husband. However, right before stepping over the wooden threshold, Monica didn't forget to shoot an anxious, terrified look back at me, dropping a pathetic, clumsy lie in a frantic attempt to cover up Brandon's obvious chemical poisoning. Dad, Douglas, Brandon must have eaten spoiled seafood at expensive restaurant last night. He has a case of food poisoning. Monica choked out, her voice cracking, her lips trembling as she bit down hard on them. Let me rush him to our family's private hospital so the top doctors can examine him and pump his stomach. Please, postpone this morning's special board meeting until this afternoon or tomorrow. Dad, please excuse me. I have to go take care of him right now. After spitting out ridiculous, pathetic lie, Monica grabbed her expensive silk dress and sprinted out of the office like a wild maniac, the sharp, chaotic clicking of her stiletto heels against the walnut floorboards fading away in the direction of the slamming front door of the estate. I remained still, sitting motionless in my expensive leather armchair, my eyes as freezing cold as an ancient, 1,000-year-old glacier, watching the 2 pathetic figures flee the room. The west-facing home office sank back into absolute, profound silence, leaving the rhythmic ticking of the antique grandfather clock sounding like a heartless countdown to the ultimate, permanent execution of the disgusting traitors who shared the Reed bloodline. I sat still on the leather armchair, my freezing eyes watching those 2 pathetic cowards run for their lives. I pulled open my desk drawer, pulled out a specialized, sterile glass vial, scraped single microscopic drop of smoky yellow liquid remaining at the bottom of the porcelain cup Brandon had drunk from, and then sealed it tight. Immediately afterward, I pressed the buttons on my secure phone, dialing the encrypted direct line of private investigator Malone, an old, trusted friend who served as the chief of homicide for the California State Police, acting as the head of the covert, underground security division tasked with protecting the Reed Malone. I spoke in a voice as freezing cold and rock-solid as a 1,000-year-old glacier. I need you to transport this sealed liquid sample to the state's supreme toxicology lab simultaneously. Activate the network of hidden, high-definition security cameras inside the estate, and extract the covert wiretap data from Brandon and Monica's personal cell phones. The absolute, ultimate purification trial of the Reed begins right this second. Exactly 2 hours later, I was sitting with my arms crossed, inside Malone's classified, bulletproof steel-reinforced safe house, located deep in the city's outskirts. Malone took strides into the room, gripping a thick forensic pathology report, stamped with a glowing red official seal, his old, wrinkled face displaying sheer, unadulterated outrage, profound shock, and absolute disgust. Douglas, Malone slammed the thick stack of documents onto the steel table right in front of me, his deep voice vibrating with intense, boiling rage. Smoky yellow coffee sample you sent in for emergency testing was not a standard sedative or common sleeping pill. Heavily concealed inside coffee was a lethal dose of toxic thallium sulfate mixed with a catastrophic grade of paralyzing neurotoxin. If you had swallowed a single gulp of coffee this morning, in 15 minutes, your central nervous system would have been paralyzed, causing acute heart failure and total respiratory collapse, murdering you right at your desk. They calculated this with malice, so the clinical symptoms would mimic a natural, sudden, fatal heart attack in a 66-year-old man, designed to bypass the state medical examiner's standard autopsy. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to let brutal, inhumane truth shred whatever microscopic shreds of love were still beating inside my chest. The son I had carried on my back throughout his childhood, the son I had spent millions of dollars on bail money to save from his arrogant, reckless mistakes, had conspired with his gold-digging wife to use a agonizing poison, to murder his father, to snatch the throne of power a few hours. Where are they hiding right now? I asked, my eyes snapping open, blazing with a lethal intensity, looking like two steel swords being drawn from their sheaths. After Brandon had his stomach pumped and received emergency mild antidotes at the discreet private clinic, where Monica suppressed the medical reports, they drove back to their luxurious private penthouse in the downtown district. Malone opened his specialized, encrypted tablet and placed it in front of me. I've connected to the covert digital micro-wiretap we planted under their living room coffee table. Listen to what they are saying right now, Douglas. Hear it for yourself. Through the sensitive, high-fidelity monitoring speaker, Monica's shrill, vicious voice echoed through the room, shrieking with intense, unadulterated fury. I screamed at you until I was blue in the face. Brandon, that old bastard Douglas is far cunning and experienced. Somehow he swapped your coffee cup right in front of our eyes without us noticing. Now the poison plan has failed. The old man will start getting suspicious and run tests. If he shows up at corporate headquarters first thing tomorrow morning and announces the absolute cancellation of the power transfer document in front of the board of directors, we will lose everything. Those ruthless Russian mobsters will come here, skin you alive, and break single bone in your pathetic body for $10 million underground gambling debt. The sharp, violent sound of Brandon smashing a crystal glass against the table echoed, his voice hoarse and dripping with the inhumane, murderous intent. We cannot allow old bastard to step foot into headquarters alive tomorrow morning. Plan A failed, so we are triggering Plan B tonight. Tomorrow, like his stubborn old habit, Douglas will drive his vintage 1965 Jaguar E-Type sports car up to the wooden cabin on the peak of the Tahoe Mountains for a relaxing getaway. At 3 o'clock tomorrow morning, I am going to unlock the back gate to let a professional, lethal mechanic from the Russian syndicate sneak into the estate's private garage. That assassin is going to use hydraulic bolt cutters to weaken the brake fluid lines underneath the Jaguar. When the old man is driving at an aggressive speed and approaches the Devil's Drop hairpin turn, the brake lines will explode. The car will smash through the guardrail and plummet 400 feet down the sheer cliff, obliterating itself on the jagged rocks at the bottom of the waterfall. The highway patrol will rule it a catastrophic, tragic traffic accident caused by vintage brake failure. When the old bastard is smashed into an unrecognizable bloody pulp inside a closed casket, I will become the sole undisputed legal heir to the empire under state law. The arrogant, triumphant, bone-chilling laughter of my son and his filthy wife hammered against my eardrums. There was no room left for microscopic shred of tolerance or forgiveness. I grabbed my encrypted secure phone and dialed Harvey, the senior elite legal counsel, who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me through 30 brutal years in the corporate war zone. Harvey, I spoke, single word striking like a steel hammer. I need you to pull my original last will and testament from the vault tonight. I need to draft and sign a classified ironclad codicil takes absolute immediate effect. Simultaneously, I need you to prepare the dark walnut memory black box I entrusted to you for maximum security 5 years ago. Tomorrow we are going to host a historic, unforgettable funeral, and casket is going to bury the future, freedom, and reputation of my flesh and blood. At 12 noon on Sunday, I threw on a light gray wool coat and walked out the front door of the mansion, looking like a haggard, exhausted, and devastated old man. Parked in the middle of the gravel driveway, gleaming under the midday sun, was my bright green, vintage Jaguar E-Type sports car. It was the exact perfect replica twin Investigator Malone had swapped from a classic car warehouse the previous night. The exact car the Russian syndicate's assassin mechanic had used hydraulic bolt cutters to weaken the brake lines on, according to the murderous plot Brandon had orchestrated. Brandon was waiting right on the front steps of the porch. He took a stride forward and hugged my shoulders with a touch was stiff, forced, and as freezing cold as solid ice. Have a relaxing, peaceful drive, Dad, and have a safe trip. As soon as you reach the peak of the Tahoe Mountains, make sure you call me right away so I can have absolute peace of mind. I will call you the exact second I reach the peak, I replied with absolute calm, piercing my deep, freezing eyes as still as a winter into his face, which was struggling to disguise his murderous excitement. I opened the car door, climbed into the classic brown leather cabin of the replica Jaguar E-Type, and twisted the ignition key. The 4.2-liter straight-six engine roared to life, unleashing the powerful deep growl characteristic of 60s-era sports cars. The car rolled through the ornate iron gates of the estate, gliding past tush-shedding oak trees, and driving straight out onto the high-speed interstate highway, heading toward the treacherous, steep Tahoe mountain range in Northern California. However, I drove the car for 2 miles on the open highway until I approached the abandoned Route 9 gas station. A former mechanical maintenance depot had been closed for over 5 years, sealed off by towering corrugated iron fences due to underground sewer construction. I checked my rearview mirror, verifying no one was tailing me, then cranked the steering wheel, slipping the car through a tight gap in the iron fence and driving into the tarp-covered dirt lot hidden behind the Route 9 station. Waiting in dirt clearing hidden behind thick, dense clusters of pine trees were investigator Malone and an elite Hollywood-tier stunt driver codenamed Rook. They were standing ready alongside a heavy-duty automotive transport truck and a large, blacked-out armored SUV with opaque anti-peeping tinted windows. Cutting through the thick clouds of dust kicked up by my tires, we executed our tactical vehicle swap with the absolute breakneck speed, perfection and extreme military discipline of an elite special forces tactical unit. Rook strode forward, climbing into the driver's seat of the twin replica Jaguar I had parked. He was already wearing the exact same light gray cashmere coat I had on, and he was sporting an intricate, custom-crafted silver wig mimicking single strand of hair and the exact tall 66-year-old physical build of Douglas Reed when viewed from behind or through a long-range recon camera lens. Meanwhile, the exact second I stepped out of the Jaguar's cabin, I hopped into the spacious back seat of the black, armored SUV, hiding myself deep inside as investigator Malone took the wheel, tailing right behind the bumper of the classic sports car. The two-vehicle convoy began its grueling, winding ascent around the treacherous mountain slopes, conquering an elevation of 6,000 feet as we headed toward the peak of Tahoe. The high-altitude winter sky was bleak, choked with lead-gray clouds carrying a freezing, bone-chilling wind. Massive gusts of wind howled through the ancient pine trees, creating a wild, desolate symphony of the harsh California wilderness. Sitting deep in the back seat of the armored SUV, I monitored the advanced central control screen. Malone had connected to the classified wireless telemetry system, installed beneath the dashboard of the Jaguar driving ahead of us. Every single critical technical parameter, speed, pressurized brake fluid levels, extreme engine temperature, and exact steering angles of the classic sports car, was displayed in razor-sharp, real-time detail as flashing digital graphs on the advanced touchscreen. When our convoy roared up the steep, narrow mountain pass, clinging to the edge of the sheer granite cliffs 10 miles from the Tahoe Summit Resort, investigator Malone's voice crackled over the internal comms radio with absolute, maximum focus and incredible intensity. "Rook, keep your eyes locked forward. We are approaching the absolute kill zone of the Devil's Drop hairpin turn, 800 meters ahead. The asphalt on this elevated section is saturated with mountain fog condensation, making it slippery, and the road has an aggressive 90-degree downward slope aiming at the edge of the abyss." The Devil's Drop curve had long been known by long-haul California truckers as the single most death trap on the Tahoe Pass. It was a sharp 90-degree hairpin turn, bending to the left at the absolute highest, steepest peak of the incline. Sitting against the extreme right edge of the curve was an sheer 400-foot vertical cliff, dropping straight down to the absolute bottom of a granite gorge, littered with gigantic, razor-sharp boulders, where a freezing, raging waterfall crashed year-round, ripping through the silence with a deafening, violent roar. Running along steep edge was a pathetic, rusted, paper-thin steel guardrail had weathered decades of brutal blizzards. It served as a minor visual warning and possessed zero mechanical strength to stop the impact of a 2-ton steel machine plunging forward at an aggressive speed. Malone's signal received, immediately preparing the emergency bailout protocol and switching to automated wireless control mode. Rook's professional, calm, and rock-solid voice echoed through the comms, lacking a single microscopic hint of fear or anxiety from a man dancing right on the razor-thin edge of absolute death. Through the front windshield of the armored SUV, trailing 30 meters behind the classic car's bumper, I saw the bright red rear brake lights of the Jaguar E-Type flash 3 consecutive times, the exact classified, prearranged signal confirming the precise moment of action had arrived. The sports car decelerated, hugging the soft, grassy embankment, hugging the inner edge of the road right before entering the death curve. In one microscopic fraction of a second, the driver's side door of the Jaguar burst open. Rook curled his body into a perfect ball like a hunting leopard, executing a flawless, high-speed tactical bailout roll, ejecting himself from the car's cabin and landing in the soft, muddy grass trench alongside the steep hill. Thanks to his heavy-duty Kevlar body armor worn underneath his coat and his elite, professional impact reduction rolling skills, Rook bounced back to his feet, safe and unharmed right on the side of the road, shooting a thumbs up toward the armored SUV. Meanwhile, the Jaguar E-Type, its cabin now empty, shifted into total wireless remote control mode, operated by Investigator Malone, manipulating the advanced electronic joystick and gas pedals through the classified central console inside the armored SUV. Malone shoved the electronic throttle lever forward on the control board. The straight-six engine roaring under the Jaguar E-Type's hood screamed a deafening roar, shredded the mountain silence, launching the green steel machine rocketing forward at a breakneck speed, 60, 70, and then 80 miles per hour, aimed straight like a guided missile at the Devil's Drop death curve. When the front bumper of the car was 40 meters away from the rusted steel guardrail, right at the edge of the cliff, Malone slammed his hand onto the emergency brake button on the remote control board to simulate the desperate panic-braking reflex of a terrified driver facing a fatal plunge. There was zero deceleration reaction or mechanical friction on of the 4 tires. The pressurized hydraulic brake fluid lines running underneath the replica car, the exact lines the filthy Russian assassin mechanic had crushed and weakened with his pliers. The previous exploded and ripped open under the intense fluid pressure, failing according to the exact mechanical sabotage Brandon had calculated. The car lost its brakes, transforming into an uncontrollable, unguided steel missile, shooting forward like an artillery shell and crashing with absolute, maximum kinetic force into the rusted steel guardrail running along the edge of the Devil's Drop cliff. The deafening screech of metal ripping apart echoed and slammed against the sheer granite cliffs, bouncing back with a booming sound overwhelmed the gorge. The pathetic paper-thin steel guardrail was shredded in half like tissue paper beneath the 4,000-pound impact force of the classic car. The Jaguar E-Type tore through the barrier, launched itself off the freezing asphalt, and hovered in mid-air above the bottomless 400-foot abyss for one precious, microscopic fraction of a second, looking like a gigantic iron bird had suffered a broken wing. Immediately following breathtaking second of weightlessness, the absolute, ruthless force of gravity grabbed the car, pulling its nose down, causing it to flip upside down as it plummeted straight down into the deep, jagged granite gorge far below. The sounds of crushing impacts, crash, boom, smash, violently shook my chest, roaring up from the gorge. Single time the steel body slammed into the sharp granite outcroppings jutting out from the cliff face, snapping the chassis into pieces and tearing the hood into thousands of tiny metal fragments flying through the freezing air. Finally, the vehicle crashed into the bottom of the sheer granite gorge, landing next to the freezing, raging waterfall, creating a thunderous explosion, shook the bottom of the abyss, sending towering plumes of thick white smoke and stone dust rising into the freezing Tahoe mountain sky. Malone steered the armored SUV into the gravel shoulder, next to the shredded, destroyed barrier, ripped off his comms headset, and spoke with a calm, relaxed voice, like a general completing a standard military drill. The tactical stunt substitution and the fake accident scene creation have been completed with 100% absolute, undeniable perfection. Not a single microscopic public camera or random witness on this pass saw a tiny flaw. I stepped out of the spacious back seat of the SUV, planting my boots onto the freezing, bone-chilling asphalt saturated with the harsh, aggressive mountain wind. I pulled the collar of my gray coat tight, taking powerful strides up to the sheer edge of the Devil's Drop abyss, looking straight down at the pathetic, smoking pile of crushed green scrap metal lying destroyed at the bottom of the jagged granite gorge, right beneath the aggressive, raging waterfall. At the exact second I stood at the top of cliff, staring straight down at the secure, sealed steel coffin my flesh and blood had built for me, My classified secure cell phone, deep inside my coat pocket, began vibrating. I reached deep into my pocket, pulling out the phone to read the notification flashing across the high-definition screen. An urgent SMS text message had been sent from Brandon Reed's personal cell phone number. He was sitting warm and comfortable inside his luxurious downtown penthouse, monitoring the precise, digital GPS tracking signal attached to my cell phone through an invasive family tracking app. The exact second he saw the digital tracking dot moving at a speed, stopping at the Devil's Drop death curve, and then losing signal deep at the bottom of the abyss, Brandon had sent fake, agonizing text message. "Dad, oh my God, did you reach the top of the Tahoe Mountain?" I watched the emergency weather report, and it said there is dense fog and dangerous, slippery ice on the pass. Monica and I are terrified for your absolute safety. Please pick up the phone or text me back so I can know you're safe, Dad. I stared at those toxic, deceitful words glowing on the phone screen, a chilling, disgusted sneer twisting my lips. In 40 grueling years battling in the cutthroat corporate world, I had faced down single type of treacherous, manipulative monster imaginable, but no competitor had ever possessed the sheer audacity to use the sacred, powerful love between a father and son as a toxic disguise for such a brutal assassination plot. I did not type a single letter in response, nor did I ever call back. I pressed the power button to shut the phone down, ripped the sensitive satellite GPS SIM card straight out of the tray, and hurled it into the freezing, icy drainage ditch on the side of the road. I turned back to look at Investigator Malone and Rook, who were sweeping the scene one last time before evacuating, and I spoke with a voice as solid and sharp as a steel blade. "We are returning to the secure safe house on the outskirts of the city. Let Brandon and Monica have 72 full hours to fake their pathetic crying, celebrate their artificial victory, and prepare for the most historic, monumental board of directors meeting tomorrow morning." For the next 72 long hours, while I sat inside the secure suburban safe house, sipping hot tea with my elite lawyer Harvey, the American financial media, and of New York City, erupted into an unprecedented public relations earthquake. On Sunday afternoon, the specialized California mountain rescue teams and elite highway patrol units deployed specialized helicopters and tactical pulley systems into the bottom of the Devil's Drop Gorge to haul the crushed remains of the 1965 Jaguar E-Type back up. Because of the impact force from a sheer 400-foot drop onto jagged granite, combined with the rapid, aggressive fireball caused by the ruptured fuel tank, the car had turned into an unrecognizable, deformed pile of blackened metal, leaving zero intact interior details inside. The California State Preliminary Forensic and Specialized Accident Investigation Units, manipulated by Investigator Malone's flawless tactical smokescreen, issued an emergency press release right on the primetime evening news. Legendary iconic business mogul Douglas Reed, chairman and CEO of the Reed Logistics conglomerate, is presumed to have died in a catastrophic, fatal traffic accident caused by vintage brake failure at the Devil's Drop curve on the Tahoe Pass. Incredibly produced memorial documentaries and detailed editorial articles praising my 40-year journey, building a logistics empire from a poor truck driver, covered the front pages of major elite financial newspapers like the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and the Financial Times. And right in the absolute center of chaotic media morning storm, Brandon and Monica performed their pathetic, fake, sorrowful crying act in front of the lenses of the aggressive paparazzi cameras when they stepped out of their penthouse on Sunday evening. Brandon wore an expensive tailored black funeral suit, his dry, arrogant eyes covered by dark sunglasses, and dabbing his face with a silk handkerchief to wipe away his fake crocodile tears, speaking to the forest of microphones with a rehearsed, choked-up voice. "The sudden, catastrophic passing of my beloved father is an incalculable loss for our and the American logistics industry. However, according to the strict binding will and the powerful final wishes my father always emphasized, I will power through this profound, sacred pain to take over the chairman's throne, maintain absolute stability, and lead Reed Logistics to continue dominating the cutthroat corporate market." At 8:30 on Monday morning, the Supreme Board of Directors conference room, located on the absolute highest, glass-enclosed 60th floor of the towering Reed Logistics headquarters, right in the absolute center of the competitive Manhattan financial district, had been prepared, looking like a courtroom designed to decide absolute corporate power. The 12 influential members of the board of directors, incredibly experienced, aggressive business titans and institutional shareholders who had fought shoulder to shoulder with me through 4 brutal decades, were sitting around the 1,000-year-old solid oak oval conference table. The stressed face of single elite board member was with shock, profound sorrow, and intense, aggressive anxiety for the absolute future of the corporate kingdom. After being notified of the tragic death of their veteran captain, Douglas Reed. Sitting in the absolute center, at the head of the table in the expensive, luxurious dark leather chair reserved for the chairman of the conglomerate, Brandon Reed was leaning back with incredible, unadulterated arrogance, looking like a young, ruthless emperor who had seized the throne. Sitting right by his left hand was Monica, wearing an expensive, elegant black silk dress adorned with a priceless diamond brooch, her arrogant, eager face hidden beneath a thin, pathetic layer of fake mourning makeup. Standing right at the far end of the conference table, the expensive, aggressive private lawyer Brandon had hired the previous night was gripping an old file containing my last will and testament, drafted 10 years ago. The specific will stipulating my son would inherit 65% of the controlling shares and the supreme chairman's throne in the specific event of my natural or tragic accidental death. When the antique clock struck 9 o'clock in the morning, Brandon slammed a wooden gavel onto the solid oak table, unleashing a loud, arrogant, and confident voice echoed through the boardroom. Distinguished, honorable members of the board of directors, though the agonizing wound of losing my beloved father is still bleeding in my heart, the responsibilities of corporate power do not allow us to delay. Strictly based on the absolute automatic inheritance clauses in the binding will my lawyer is holding right now, I, Brandon Reed, officially declare my immediate assumption of the role of chairman and chief executive officer of the Reed Logistics conglomerate, starting this exact second. The exact second the word second burst from Brandon's mouth, and the weak, pathetic smattering of applause from 2 minority shareholders began to echo. A deafening sequence of sounds shredded the solemn atmosphere of the boardroom. The carved walnut double doors of the conference room but slid wide open with absolute, aggressive, authoritative force. An freezing gust of air from the marble hallway outside rushed straight into the room, making the flames in the crystal chandeliers flicker and dance. Taking powerful strides straight over the threshold into the absolute center of the boardroom was me, Douglas Reed. I was wearing an pristine, flawless, custom-tailored jet black cashmere suit with single luxurious crease ironed, a elegant light gray silk tie knotted beneath my crisp bright white dress shirt collar, and polished black leather Oxford shoes reflected the bright golden lights. My 66-year-old body stood as straight and rock-solid as an ancient pine tree had survived 1,000 brutal storms. My broad shoulders, which used to carry wooden crates weighing hundreds of pounds, showed no microscopic signs of pathetic, sagging fatigue, and my razor-sharp eyes blazed like 2 lethal steel swords, piercing and locking onto the terrified face of my biological son. There was zero trace of the most microscopic, pathetic scratch on my face, not a single speck of road dust or microscopic drop of fresh blood on my suit jacket. I stood there, alive in the flesh, exuding an overwhelming, suffocating aura of supreme authority, the complete, absolute opposite of the crushed, obliterated corpse at the bottom of the Devil's Drop Gorge Brandon had cried about mere minutes ago. Taking aggressive, confident strides by my right side was elite undercover private investigator Malone, his wrinkled, sharp face focused as he gripped a digital tablet displaying the comprehensive file of absolute, undeniable evidence, and taking synchronized strides behind us were 4 intimidating police officers from the elite Special Homicide Investigation Unit of the California State Police. They were wearing full tactical combat gear, armored in jet black bulletproof vests, displaying the state police insignia glowing in bright yellow right on their chests, tactical belts loaded with polished steel handcuffs, and lethal Glock 17 sidearms. Their cold, razor-sharp faces scanned the room as they took strides inside, and securing the main exits and blocking the boardroom windows. All 12 elite members of the board of directors erupted in deafening, shocked screams and gasps of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Mr. Sterling, the veteran, 68-year-old shareholder who had co-founded the Newark Port Division with me decades, flinched backward in sheer shock, causing his leather armchair to tip over and crash down onto the walnut floorboards with a deafening bang. He gripped the edge of the table with trembling hands, looking as if he were witnessing an impossible supernatural ghost. "Dear God Almighty, Douglas. You are standing here, alive in the flesh, right in front of our eyes." But the most ultimate and pathetic reaction of sheer terror belonged to the wealthy married couple sitting at the absolute head of the conference table. Brandon's flushed, arrogant complexion died out in one microscopic millisecond, mutating into a gray color like a rotting corpse buried deep in a fresh grave. Both of his pupils dilated, so they looked like they were going to pop right out of his eye sockets. His jaw dropped slack, leaving his mouth hanging wide open, unable to produce sound other than a desperate, wheezing gasp rattling deep inside his throat. Both of his hands gripped the leather armrests of the Supreme Chairman's chair, so his fingernails started bleeding, his body shaking as if a lethal current of high-voltage electricity was surging through him. Meanwhile, Monica let out a shrill, deafening, ear-piercing shriek, like an air raid siren shredding the eardrums of the board. She threw her body backward in sheer terror, causing her expensive designer handbag to crash onto the floor, revealing her trembling fingers pointing at me, as if she were staring at a vengeful, bloodthirsty demon crawling straight out of the deepest pits of hell. Dad, how can you? Your body is crushed at the bottom of the Devil's Drop Gorge." Brandon choked out, tearing each pathetic word, his voice shattering into thousands of pathetic, desperate fragments, so terrified he had lost the basic human ability to control his speech. I took slow, calculated, and strides clicked against the solid oak floorboards, walking straight to the absolute head of the conference table, stopping 3 feet away from the chairman's chair. I reached out my calloused hand and gripped my son's shaking shoulder, leaning down to speak in a booming, authoritative, and freezing cold voice sounded like the bell of ultimate judgment ringing in a supreme courtroom. "Brandon Reed, did you believe a seasoned 66-year-old man who survived 40 brutal, cutthroat years in the corporate war zone, a man who crushed the most ruthless armed competitors to build this Reed logistics empire, could be so murdered by you and your venomous wife using a cheap, pathetic cup of morning herbal coffee, or crushed at the absolute bottom of a gorge because of a clumsy, pathetic bolt-cutter sabotage in a garage?" My steel-hard words roared across the boardroom, causing 12 elite board members to freeze in terrified silence, their mouths hanging wide open as they realized the inhumane, psychopathic reality of an orchestrated assassination plot occurring inside the bloodline. I turned my head to look at my elite lawyer, Harvey, who was striding up right next to the table. I tapped my finger against the solid oak wood and gave the ultimate command. "Harvey, broadcast and present the absolute, supreme legal truth of this empire to the board of directors and to these 2 pathetic, filthy traitors sitting right here." Lawyer Harvey smiled with chilling, supreme composure, flipping open his expensive, custom-made Italian alligator skin briefcase, pulling out 2 thick stacks of legal documents stamped with glowing red wax seals from the California State Notary Office. He lifted the first stack of documents in front of the shareholders, his voice sharp, precise, and authoritative, echoing through the room. "Distinguished members of the board of directors, this is the comprehensive, explosive, 53-page investigative evidence file, accompanied by high-definition digital storage microchips and collected by our elite underground security division over the last 72 hours. Securely enclosed inside this document is the official forensic pathology report from the state's Supreme Central Laboratory regarding the gold-rimmed coffee sample containing a lethal dose of thallium sulfate poison and brewed by the guilty defendant Monica here. Aggressively attached to this is a crystal-clear, 15-minute covert audio recording, capturing the earth-shattering voluntary confession between the married couple inside their penthouse on Wednesday night, detailing how they hired a lethal Russian syndicate assassin to sabotage the hydraulic brake lines of the Jaguar E-Type, alongside classified 4K high-resolution infrared reconnaissance photos, exposing the exact face of the Russian mechanic breaking into the estate garage at 3 o'clock in the morning. This criminal dossier has already been submitted to the Federal Prosecutor's Office of the Southern District of New York and the Federal Bureau of Investigations to pursue organized attempted murder charges and coordinated corporate theft conspiracy. Monica erupted into pathetic, desperate, agonizing sobs, her expensive, luxurious makeup smeared and washed away by floods of pathetic tears, turning her face into a disgusting gray mess. She collapsed her head onto the edge of the table, crying and begging for absolute mercy. Brandon's face was ashen, looking like dead gray ashes. Both of his legs had lost physical strength, and he slumped forward, his head hanging in his chair. And it does not stop there. Lawyer Harvey continued, pulling out the thick second stack of legal documents, featuring the glowing gold lion crest of the stamped on the front cover, his voice delivering the ultimate, devastating absolute judgment. Acting upon his supreme authority as the absolute chairman and majority shareholder, owning 65% of the controlling stock, Mr. Douglas Reed has signed the supplementary will codicil designated Codicil 9, which took absolute, binding immediate effect starting yesterday morning. According to this ironclad, supreme legal addendum, Brandon Reed is stripped of an inheritance rights and is terminated from executive management positions and board of directors memberships at Reed Logistics. The block of 65% controlling shares, along with Mr. Douglas Reed's personal portfolio of multi-billion-dollar assets, is transferred and merged into an independent, supreme trust fund named the Reed Logistics Employee Welfare Trust. This fund will be managed by an independent supervisory board, utilized to pay for full college tuitions, comprehensive health insurance, and secure retirement pension funds for the 15,000 dedicated truck drivers, hard-working dock workers, and brilliant dispatchers who dedicate their days and nights to building this empire. An deafening and ecstatic explosion of thunderous applause erupted from 12 elite members of the board of directors. Mr. Sterling jumped to his feet, tears of profound joy welling in his eyes as he applauded the absolute greatest, most decisive and humanitarian decision in the 40-year history of the conglomerate. I cast my freezing, lethal gaze down at Brandon, who was cowering and shrinking like a disgusting, filthy insect right beneath the throne of power, and I spoke with a freezing, bone-chilling voice, sealing his absolute, final, pathetic fate. Brandon, you believed murdering your biological father would allow you to sit on this absolute, supreme chair and enjoy my wealth. But today, I am teaching you what true, absolute corporate power looks like. You have not a single red cent left in bank account, 0 remaining shares in this conglomerate, and you are expelled from the Reed bloodline. Right now, get the hell out of my boardroom and step into the armored federal prison transport van waiting for you down in the courtyard. I turned my head and tapped my finger, giving the ultimate command to the 4 armed California State Tactical Police officers surrounding the doors of the room. Officers, please execute your absolute legal duty. Immediately escort these 2 guilty, pathetic criminals out of my corporate headquarters. The 4 muscled police officers took long, aggressive strides forward, locking Brandon and Monica's trembling wrists with polished, steel figure-8 handcuffs snapped shut with an freezing, loud click-clack. Brandon cried out in pathetic, desperate agony, both of his knees buckling as the 2 officers hauled him up by the armpits, dragging him across the walnut floorboards and throwing him out of the conference room. Monica screamed in sheer, absolute hysterical desperation, her arrogant, upper-class voice shattering into pathetic shreds as she was marched down the hallway, exposed to the freezing, disgusted and contemptuous glares of the board of shareholders and the corporate staff. When the wooden doors slammed shut behind them, I walked back to my absolute rightful place at the absolute head of the table, pulling the chair out and sitting rock solid onto the supreme, luxurious leather chairman's throne. I placed both of my hands flat onto the 1,000-year-old solid oak table and spoke with a calm, precise and authoritative voice to the internal, necessary absolute purification of this company is complete. Right now, we are beginning our strategic reporting session on expanding the maritime shipping routes for this upcoming financial quarter. On Wednesday night of exact same week, I drove my SUV alone, returning to the secure, classified safe house on the outskirts of the city to meet with Investigator Malone and hear the comprehensive progress report from the Joint Task Force. Sitting beside the walnut tea table with 2 glasses of classic, aged 20-year-old bourbon, Malone slammed down a thick preliminary interrogation report file right in front of me, which had been transferred from the federal prosecutor's office in the Southern District of New York. The complex underground financial numbers, classified digital decrypted text messages, and the web of cross-referenced testimonies contained within the file once again exposed the absolute ruthlessness and bottomless greed of my son and his filthy wife. Brandon, crushed under the unbearable pressure of the clear, undeniable 4K high-resolution video evidence and the pristine, crystal-clear audio recordings, had collapsed after 72 grueling hours isolated in a maximum security solitary confinement cell at the Metropolitan Detention Center. He sobbed, screamed out of control, and turned on his wife, blaming Monica for the assassination plot. He confessed to single specific detail of their covert, illegal meetings with a dangerous Russian loan shark boss, codenamed White Bear, inside an underground casino disguised deep beneath a dirty bar in Atlantic City. Desperately needing piles of cash to throw into illegal rigged underground baccarat games, Brandon had signed an unauthorized mortgage contract, promising his future stock options in Reed Logistics to the violent Russian syndicate for a sum of $15 million. When the strict, absolute deadline for the debt repayment approached and the ruthless mobsters mailed a threatening copper-jacketed bullet alongside a high-definition telephoto picture of my West Wing estate patio to their penthouse to threaten their lives, the treacherous, evil married couple decided to execute the absolute fastest, most brutal solution possible. Murder their 66-year-old father using toxic chemicals and a vintage car crash to seize my fortune and absolute executive control over the maritime shipping empire. However, the absolute singular thing comforted my soul and made me feel at peace throughout this catastrophic storm was not the humiliating, devastating punishment inflicted upon my ungrateful, filthy blood relatives. It was the warm, loyal, and united response from the hard-working, genuine people who had stood shoulder to shoulder with me to build this empire. Immediately following the press conference announcing the historic establishment of the $500 million Reed Employee Welfare Trust, thousands of emotional, genuine handwritten letters and floods of grateful emails from the tough long-haul truck drivers navigating the interstate highways, the gritty dock workers unloading cargo, and the dedicated warehouse staff began pouring into my West Wing office. A veteran, 60-year-old senior mechanic who had worked at the Newark Port Maintenance Facility for 25 brutal years had written rugged, emotional words on a simple sheet of notebook paper, accompanied by the united signatures of over 500 of his loyal mechanic brothers. Dear respected Mr. Douglas, when we first heard the news your son had filed a greedy lawsuit demanding the courts to freeze the corporation's accounts, our Brotherhood of United Workers agreed to launch a total comprehensive strike, shutting down 18 seaports to protect your legitimate, honorable legacy. Now knowing you are safe and standing rock solid at the supreme helm of this corporation, and our children now have full college tuition and comprehensive medical insurance from the Welfare Trust, we bow our heads in profound absolute gratitude. We swear to protect and dedicate our lives and absolute loyalty to the strong, united Reed Logistics until our absolute dying breaths. Those raw, genuine, and rugged words overflowing with profound human loyalty were the absolute true, priceless fortune, the real supreme crown of power no toxic chemical poison or lethal bolt cutter could ever steal from my hands. I sat leaning back into the leather armchair inside my fortified West Wing office, casting my calm, freezing eyes out the window where the peaceful darkness of the night was wrapping around the quiet gravel garden of the estate. On the 1,000-year-old solid oak desk, there were no toxic power transfer documents or cups of smoky yellow poisoned coffee anymore. Replacing them were strategic expansion contracts, detailing the ambitious maritime shipping routes, extending to the most seaports across Europe. Sitting beside them was a detailed comprehensive recruitment and elite training master plan, designed to discover and mold the talented, transparent, honorable, and righteous next generation of elite young managers to prepare for the corporation's powerful future over the next 10 years. The brutal, agonizing lesson of blood and bone caused by the traumatic betrayal of my biological son had carved a painful, indelible scar deep into the absolute core of my heart. But exact scar was also the powerful, absolute ultimate shield, helped me realize the absolute, supreme truth of true, enduring power. A true genuine is not defined by the random, natural drops of blood flowing through your veins, but it must be proven through unshakable loyalty, resilient dedication, and the beautiful, Noble human values we fight to protect together through single destructive storm in life. The intense, explosive 60 days, following historic supreme night of ultimate judgment at the estate, transformed into incomprehensive and earth-shattering legal war shocked the American media, supreme judicial system, and financial sector. Thanks to the meticulous, flawless preparation by elite investigator Malone and the aggressive legal advisory team led by Supreme Lawyer Harvey, the prosecution dossier submitted to the Federal Prosecutor's Office of the Southern District of New York was as complete, detailed, and rock-solid as an impenetrable bunker built from reinforced concrete and solid steel. The complex chain of advanced forensic, classified digital, and undeniable witness evidence did not contain a single, microscopic flaw. Starting from the lethal toxicology test of the thallium sulfate dose extracted from the absolute bottom of the gold-rimmed porcelain cup Brandon had drunk from, to the clinical neurological examination results, from the emergency stomach pumping records at Monica's exclusive private hospital, to the pristine 4K high-resolution infrared surveillance footage capturing single aggressive movement of the lethal Russian assassin Nikolai, using hydraulic bolt cutters to sabotage the Jaguar's brake lines in the garage at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the lethal, undeniable 15-minute audio recording captured from underneath the penthouse table. During the first aggressive preliminary hearing, in front of the federal grand jury at the towering Manhattan District Court, the elite, expensive team of 7 top-tier defense lawyers Monica had scraped her personal savings to hire were forced to bow their heads in absolute, total surrender against the overwhelming weight of the absolute legal truth. When they realized the steel doors of the federal prison were slamming shut in front of their eyes, with crushing sentences could reach life without parole, the pathetic nature, the ruthless, selfish greed, and the cold, calculated transactional nature hidden inside the superficial upper-class marriage of Brandon and Monica exploded into the most disgusting, treacherous, and display in the courtroom. Right inside the secure, one-way glass interrogation room of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in Manhattan, Monica sobbed, pretending to faint, and submitted an urgent legal petition through her private lawyer, begging to flip and become a protected special state witness for the federal and state prosecution in exchange for a desperate, reduced minimum plea deal. She confessed the absolute, total truth. Brandon was the exact mastermind who concocted the idea to poison me with the fresh ginger herbal coffee after he was threatened with having his arms and legs broken by the Russian mob over his illegal $15 million underground gambling debt at the Atlantic City casino. Conversely, when the aggressive federal investigators confronted Brandon with his treacherous wife's explosive betrayal testimony, Brandon went insane inside his secure solitary confinement cell. He screamed, hurled toxic curses, and counter-accused Monica was the exact dangerous person who contacted and used her shady network of wealthy party friends to purchase the lethal thallium sulfate compound from an illegal black market chemical smuggling ring originating in Eastern Europe. Furthermore, he swore it was Monica's guilty, filthy hands had mixed the poison and sprinkled the lethal, smoky yellow film into the morning porcelain cup. The pathetic, treacherous couple, who had embraced each other by the living room table, raising expensive crystal glasses of luxurious Dom Perignon champagne to toast the impending brutal murder of their biological father, were now tearing each other's fake masks off, blaming and cursing each other with the most toxic, venomous words imaginable while exposed to the freezing, contemptuous glares of the federal prosecutors. Absolutely not stopping at executing the appropriate, devastating punishment for the 2 treacherous traitors inside I decided to utilize this perfect opportunity to coordinate with elite federal law enforcement agencies, to launch a destructive lightning strike to obliterate the dangerous underground criminal syndicates had dared to extend their toxic tentacles to threaten the absolute safety of the Reed bloodline. Strongly relying on detailed encrypted intelligence regarding illegal offshore bank accounts and precise GPS satellite tracking data extracted from the cell phones confiscated by investigator Malone from Brandon's desperate confession, and strategic joint tactical raid between the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the elite New Jersey State Police Special Weapons and Tactics Team was launched at 5 o'clock in the morning on a freezing Friday, in the middle of a violent winter blizzard. Over 80 armed elite tactical officers equipped with lethal weaponry, specialized armored breaching vehicles, and trained K-9 attack units, and surrounded single hidden escape route of the secure underground mansion and the basement bar in Atlantic City. In 2 violent, explosive hours of overwhelming tactical gunfire and absolute suppression, the illegal loan sharking network, the armed weapons smuggling ring, and the money laundering operation, disguised beneath the underground casino of the dangerous Russian syndicate, were eradicated by the roots. The brutal Russian mob boss codenamed White Bear, alongside the lethal assassin mechanic Nikolai, the exact filthy scum who used hydraulic cutters to sabotage the brake lines of my classic Jaguar E-Type were handcuffed and marched out of their classified underground bunker, alongside 20 steel briefcases stuffed full with illegal, dirty cash and crates loaded with lethal, illegal military-grade weaponry. The freezing, polished steel figure-8 handcuffs and locked their wrists together, shattering their arrogant, pathetic delusion they could ever use brute force ballistic violence and toxic intimidation to manipulate a formidable maritime shipping conglomerate, possessed a solid, 40-year rock-solid foundation in the cutthroat corporate war zone. Exactly 2 historic months after Supreme Night of Ultimate Judgment inside the Estate Library, the anticipated, absolute official sentencing hearing was held inside the solemn courtroom number 1 at the towering Manhattan Federal Courthouse, presided over by the respected veteran federal judge Richard Vance, a supreme magistrate renowned for his strict, impartial, and ironclad sentences delivered from the bench. I wore an pristine, flawless jet-black suit, sitting, and in the absolute front row reserved for the immediate and esteemed victims, both of my arms crossed over my chest, my freezing, deep eyes looking as still and rock-solid as a freezing winter lake at the 2 pathetic, cowering figures standing defeated before the judge's bench. Brandon Reed, my pathetic biological son, was no longer wearing an expensive tailored Italian cashmere suit worth thousands of dollars, nor was he reeking of luxurious, expensive cologne. He was now drowning inside a bright, neon orange prison jumpsuit characteristic of the federal maximum security prison system. Both of his legs were locked in steel chains, clanked against the solid wooden floor, making a pathetic click-clack noise with single exhausted step. His face, which had been so arrogant and commanding 2 short months ago when he tried to seize the board of directors, was now gaunt. Both of his cheeks were sunken, and his skin was as pale and gray as a terrified, soulless ghost. His eyes were swollen from months of intense insomnia, absolute psychological collapse, and sheer, desperate terror, glued to the floor to once look up and make direct eye contact with his father. Standing right beside him was Monica, her expensive hair now a messy, tangled, unkempt disaster. Stripped of luxurious care, massive floods of pathetic tears streamed down her face, smearing her exhausted, gray complexion as she dug her trembling fingernails deep into the edge of the wooden defense table, bracing herself as Judge Vance slammed his sacred wooden gavel down onto the bench and unleashed the absolute, supreme final sentence. Defendant Brandon Reed. Judge Vance's stern, authoritative, and absolute ironclad voice echoed, bouncing off the walls of the large courtroom, plunging the gallery into absolute silence. Based on the exceptional brutality of this crime, the absolute, complete violation of single basic moral standard of a human being by orchestrating the premeditated, calculated murder of the biological father who gave you life and raised you, combined with your dangerous, malicious conspiracy to hire a lethal organized crime syndicate to orchestrate a catastrophic vehicular disaster, threatening the lives of the public on a state highway. This court sentences the defendant to 40 consecutive years in federal prison, to be served at the secure Colorado Maximum Security Federal Penitentiary, with 0 possibility of parole or release under circumstances whatsoever. Defendant Monica Reed, acting as an aggressive, active co-conspirator in the malicious conspiracy to purchase lethal chemical poisons and destroy crucial evidence, despite your desperate, self-serving attempt to flip and testify as a state witness. This court sentences you to 20 years in federal prison at the Danbury Federal Correctional Institution for Women. The desperate, pathetic, agonizing sobs from Monica, combined with the suffocating, terrified whimpers of absolute despair, rattling deep inside Brandon's throat, echoed through the room as 2 armed federal marshals marched forward, locking their steel wrist chains and dragging them through the solid mahogany side door of courtroom number 1. heading outside toward the armored maximum security prison transport van waiting in the secure courtyard. I stood straight up from the absolute front row, raising my hand to adjust the crisp, flawless collar of my familiar, luxurious light gray cashmere coat, and walked out of the courtroom, flanked by elite lawyer Harvey and Supreme Investigator Malone. As we took strides down the grand 16 marble steps in front of the main entrance to the federal courthouse, bathed in the bright but freezing cold winter sunlight of downtown Manhattan, dozens of media camera lenses, sensitive directional microphones, and hundreds of aggressive reporters from the absolute biggest, most elite financial news networks in America had surrounded both sides of the secure path barricaded by police lines, waiting for the anticipated, absolute official statement from the supreme titan of the Reed logistics empire. I stopped my strides for 10 short seconds on the absolute highest marble step, casting an rock-solid, freezing gaze as unshakable as a 1,000-year-old pine tree never bends to into the sea of flashing television cameras, and spoke with a deep, booming and ironclad voice, delivering single word with maximum power. Ladies and gentlemen, and the investment community, the absolute, supreme justice of the law has been and executed. The toxic, rotten elements, hidden within the executive leadership, have been eradicated. The Reed and the Reed Logistics conglomerate are stepping into a brand new, glorious era of expansion is transparent, rock-solid, and more powerful than ever before. On the crisp, bright Saturday morning of the exact following week, after historic, monumental sentencing hearing, I chose not to relax inside my luxurious West Wing office at the estate, but instead drove my heavy-duty SUV to the towering maritime port number 8 in the industrial Newark region of New Jersey, the exact, gritty starting point where this logistics empire was born 40 grueling years ago. The aggressive, freezing cold Atlantic Ocean breeze whipped in from the deep sea, chilling me to the bone, carrying the sharp, salty taste of the ocean, the distinct smell of diesel fuel, and the nostalgic, rugged aroma of the docks, the exact place where I had dedicated my absolute youth, fueled by passionate, burning ambition, wrestling and unloading shipping crates, weighing hundreds of pounds using my bare, calloused hands. I was wearing a durable, thick military green canvas jacket, taking confident strides along the heavy-duty reinforced concrete pier stretching over 2,000 meters long. I cast my deep gaze far out into the ocean, where 3 gigantic super heavyweight container ships, each boasting a 20,000 TEU capacity and displaying the glowing gold lion logo of Reed Logistics, were cutting through the ocean waves to dock under the flawless, precise coordination of the advanced automated crane systems. The loud ship horns roared, shredding through the open expanse of the bustling port, blending with the vibrant, spirited shouts of hundreds of tough, dedicated heavy truck drivers, skilled maintenance mechanics, and brilliant port dispatchers working hard in the bustling weekend morning shift. When they recognized the familiar, towering 66-year-old figure of their absolute supreme chairman, Douglas Reed, walking through the central engineering workshop, dozens of dedicated workers dropped their steel wrenches, pulled off their bright yellow hard hats, and took strides to surround me, displaying the most bright, genuine, rugged, and beautiful smiles found anywhere in the working world. The veteran, tough 60-year-old shift foreman, the exact loyal man who had signed emotional, handwritten letter on behalf of 500 of his loyal mechanic brothers, last month took long strides forward, grasping both of my calloused hands. His weathered, old eyes welled up with emotional, genuine tears as he spoke profound words straight from the absolute bottom of his loyal heart. Dear respected Mr. Douglas, our brotherhood of loyal dock workers congratulates you for standing strong and defeating the absolute most dangerous storm of your life. The generous $500 million employee welfare trust you so established began covering the expensive cardiovascular surgery costs at a top-tier hospital for young driver Jimmy's precious 6-year-old daughter this past Wednesday, and over 80 comprehensive, full-ride college tuitions for the children of our loyal dock workers were disbursed into their university accounts. First thing this morning. Speaking on behalf of the 15,000 dedicated, hard-working, working-class families who live, survive, and thrive thanks to this strong, united Reed Logistics, we bow our heads in absolute, profound gratitude. We swear to you we will protect and dedicate our lives to this conglomerate with of our strength, brilliant minds, and absolute, supreme loyalty until our dying breaths. I gripped the calloused, grease-stained hands of the tough old mechanic, feeling hard, resilient callus on his palms. Calluses were identical to the rugged ones I bore 40 years ago when I was the ambitious, broke young truck driver fighting to survive in this brutal world. A bright wave of absolute warmth and profound human meaning flooded my chest, shattering the freezing isolation, and the agonizing sense of deep emptiness had clawed at my mind on the morning I discovered cup of smoky yellow poisoned coffee in my estate office. I realized the ultimate truth, a staggering multi-billion-dollar fortune, glamorous, towering glass skyscrapers in the elite financial district, and bank account balances are never the greatest, most monumental legacy a man can leave behind when entering the final chapter of his life. The strongest, most noble and immortal legacy man can build in this harsh world is the absolute protection, the unshakable loyalty, and the better, peaceful lives of thousands of genuine souls who stood shoulder to shoulder with you, battling through single destructive storm the corporate world could ever throw at you. I stood straight and majestic at the absolute peak of Pier 8 in Newark, under the bright, blue winter sky overflowing with the warm, comforting New York sunshine, and took a deep breath of the free, wild and resolute Atlantic Ocean wind. The toxic, putrid tumors and the disgusting, filthy corruption rotting deep inside the internal structure had been eradicated. The unstoppable machine known as Reed Logistics was now operating at its absolute maximum speed, fueled by absolute transparency, total integrity, and the highest level of absolute security in its 40-year history. I am Douglas Reed, 66 years old, and I am proud to know my journey of living and dedicating my life is not over yet. I will continue to sit rock solid on the absolute supreme executive throne of this conglomerate, steering this gigantic maritime fleet to conquer single ocean and volatile market fluctuation, right up until the exact day I find, forge, and train the absolute most deserving, flawless next generation of elite leaders, incredible individuals who do not possess brilliant, razor-sharp minds and extraordinary strategic vision, but who also carry a noble human heart, absolute, unshakable integrity, and a profound, life-or-death sense of responsibility toward single precious life, standing shoulder to shoulder with them.